They called him Bill the janitor, the quiet old man who cleaned their classrooms after hours. Nobody knew that 20 years ago he'd been Dr. William Patterson, one of MIT's most brilliant mathematics professors. Welcome to Motivation Unknown. People. Before we begin this incredible story of hidden brilliance and second chances, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe genius can be found in the most unexpected places, hit that subscribe button and help us share these amazing stories. Lincoln High School in South Boston wasn't the kind of place that attracted attention. Built in the 1960s, its brick facade had weathered decades of budget cuts and administrative changes. The hallways smelled of industrial cleaner and teenage anxiety, and the fluorescent lights hummed constantly, casting everything in a harsh, institutional glow. William Patterson had worked there for 3 years, arriving each weekday at 6 a.m. and leaving at 2 p.m. after the morning cleaning was complete. At 67, he moved with the deliberate pace of someone whose body had accumulated years of physical labor, but his eyes remained sharp and alert, taking in details that others missed. The students called him Bill when they called him anything at the all. Most of the time, they simply stepped around him as he mopped the hallways or emptied wastebaskets, as invisible as the cleaning supplies he carried. The teachers were polite but distant, offering brief nods and occasional small talk about the weather. "Morning, Bill," they'd say, hurrying past with their coffee and lesson plans. "Morning," he'd reply, never elaborating, never intruding on their busy schedules. Bill preferred it that way. He'd learned to find peace in the routine of physical work, the methodical sweeping, the systematic cleaning of whiteboards, the careful arrangement of desks. After 25 years of academic pressure and intellectual competition, the simplicity of custodial work felt like a refuge. His cart contained the usual supplies: disinfectant, paper towels, trash bags, a mop and bucket. What it didn't contain were the mathematical journals he used to read, the research papers he used to publish, or any trace of the life he'd left behind at MIT. Room 3 to 12 was always the last stop on Bill's morning route. Mrs. Chen, the AP Calculus teacher, left her classroom meticulously organized, which made his job easier. She was one of the younger teachers, enthusiastic about mathematics in a way that reminded Bill of his former graduate students. That Tuesday morning, Bill noticed something different when he entered the classroom. On the main whiteboard, someone had written a complex differential equation, one that hadn't been erased from the previous day's lesson. As Bill began cleaning the other boards, he found himself studying the problem. It was an elegant piece of mathematics dealing with optimization theory, but there was an error in the solution approach that someone had attempted. Bill had seen this type of problem before. In fact, he'd published papers on similar optimization challenges back when he was Dr. Patterson, back when his name appeared in mathematical journals and his lectures drew graduate students from around the world. He continued his cleaning routine, but his mind kept returning to the whiteboard. The problem was actually quite sophisticated for a high school class, probably something Mrs. Chen was using to challenge her advanced students. The attempted solution showed promise, but had taken a wrong turn about halfway through. The student, or teacher, had tried to apply a standard technique that worked for simpler cases, but broke down when dealing with the nonlinear constraints involved. Bill finished cleaning the room, but found himself standing in front of the whiteboard, studying the mathematics with the kind of intensity he hadn't felt in years. Almost without thinking, he picked up a marker. When Mrs. Chen arrived at school that morning, she expected to find room 312 exactly as she'd left it. Clean, organized, ready for another day of teaching calculus to teenagers who mostly wished they were anywhere else. Instead, she found the whiteboard covered with mathematical notation that took her breath away. The optimization problem she'd posed to her students. The day before, the one that had stumped even her brightest pupils, had been solved. Not just solved, but solved with an elegance and insight that surpassed anything she could have done herself. The solution employed advanced techniques she recognized from graduate-level mathematics: Lagrange multipliers, variational calculus, methods she barely remembered from her own master's degree program. But more than the sophistication of the mathematics, it was the handwriting that puzzled her. This wasn't the work of a student. The notation was too mature, too confident. The presentation was that of someone who had spent decades thinking about mathematical problems at the highest level. Mrs. Chen photographed the board with her phone and sent the image to Dr. Rodriguez, her former professor at Boston University, with a message. "Any idea who might have solved this? It appeared overnight in my classroom." The reply came back within an hour. "This is graduate-level work, possibly doctoral. The approach is innovative. Whoever did this understands optimization theory at a very deep level." "Where did you say this came from?" Mrs. Chen stared at the whiteboard, trying to make sense of what had happened. The custodial staff had keys to every room, but the idea that a maintenance worker had solved an advanced calculus problem seemed impossible. She decided to leave the solution on the board and see what happened. For the next week, Mrs. Chen conducted a quiet experiment. Each day, she left a different mathematical problem on the whiteboard, problems that ranged from challenging high school topics to graduate-level theory. Every morning, she found solutions. Not just correct answers, but insights that revealed deep mathematical understanding. Whoever was solving these problems wasn't just mechanically applying formulas. They were thinking creatively, finding elegant approaches that demonstrated genuine mathematical intuition. On Friday, Mrs. Chen decided to stay late and catch whoever was responsible. She hid in the supply closet next to room 312 at 7 p.m., after the building had officially closed. At 7:30, she heard the familiar sound of a custodial cart being wheeled down the hallway. Through the crack in the closet door, she watched Bill enter the classroom with his cleaning supplies. He began his usual routine, emptying wastebaskets, wiping down desks, sweeping the floor. But when he reached the whiteboard, he stopped. The problem Mrs. Chen had left that day was particularly challenging, a piece of number theory that she'd pulled from a graduate textbook. She'd expected it to stump whoever had been solving the others. Bill studied the problem for several minutes, his cleaning forgotten. Then, with the same careful precision he used for all his work, he picked up a marker and began writing. Mrs. Chen watched in amazement as the solution emerged on the board. The mathematics was beautiful, a proof that combined elementary techniques with sophisticated insights to arrive at an unexpected conclusion. When Bill finished, he stood back and examined his work with the critical eye of someone accustomed to checking mathematical arguments for errors. Satisfied, he erased his writing, cleaned the whiteboard thoroughly, and continued with his custodial duties. Mrs. Chen waited until he left the room, then emerged from the closet. "Excuse me," she called softly. "Bill?" He turned, mop in hand, surprised to see a teacher in the building so late. "Mrs. Chen? Working late again?" "I need to ask you something," she said, walking toward him. "The mathematics problems I've been leaving on my board, have you been solving them?" Bill was quiet for a long moment. "I hope I haven't been overstepping," he said finally. "I can stop if it's a problem." "Overstepping?" Mrs. Chen stared at him. "Bill, the work you've been doing is graduate-level mathematics. Where did you learn to solve problems like these?" Bill leaned on his mop handle, studying her face. "I used to teach," he said simply. "Teach what?" Where? Another pause. Mathematics. At MIT. The conversation that followed changed everything. Dr. William Patterson had indeed been one of MIT's most respected mathematics professors, specializing in number theory and optimization. He'd published over 40 papers, mentored dozens of graduate students, and held the prestigious Norbert Wiener Chair in mathematics. His fall from academic grace had been swift and devastating. A combination of personal tragedy, the death of his wife in a car accident, and professional burnout had led to a breakdown that cost him his career, his reputation, and nearly his sanity. For 20 years, he'd been William Patterson, former professor. For the last 3 years, he'd been Bill the janitor, finding solace in work that required his hands instead of his mind. "But why here?" Mrs. Chen asked as they sat in her empty classroom. "Why custodial work?" "Because nobody expects anything from a janitor except clean floors," Bill replied. "No pressure to publish, no committees to serve on, no tenure reviews, just honest work." "But you're brilliant. You could still be teaching." "I was brilliant," Bill corrected. "Now, I'm just a man who remembers how to solve mathematics problems." Mrs. Chen wasn't satisfied with that answer. Over the following weeks, she convinced Bill to help her after school with students who were struggling with advanced mathematics. Unofficially, quietly, without fanfare. Word spread slowly through the school. Teachers began bringing their most challenging problems to Bill, not as Dr. Patterson, the former MIT professor, but as Bill, the custodian who happened to be good with numbers. Students who had never given him a second glance started staying after school for help with homework. They didn't care about his academic credentials. They just knew he could explain calculus in ways that made sense. 6 months later, the principal approached Bill with an offer. Would he consider teaching part-time while continuing his custodial duties? The math department needed help, and his unconventional background might actually be an asset. Bill accepted, but with conditions. No formal title, no pressure to return to research, no expectation that he would become Dr. Patterson again. He would simply be Bill, the man who cleaned classrooms and happened to teach mathematics. His first official class was remedial algebra, filled with students who had been written off as not math people. Using chalk-covered hands that were more accustomed to holding mops than markers, Bill began teaching them that mathematics wasn't about being smart. It was about being curious. By the end of the semester, his remedial students were outperforming the advanced classes. Lincoln High School had found its secret weapon, not in a celebrated academic hire, but in the custodian who had been walking their halls all along, carrying brilliance in a maintenance cart and wisdom in work-worn hands. And Bill had found something, too. A way to be useful without being important, to teach without the pressure of fame, and to find purpose in the simple act of helping students discover that they were capable of more than they ever imagined. Sometimes the greatest teachers are the ones who've learned to find genius in the ordinary and extraordinary impact in the most humble work. Welcome to Motivation Unknown People. These are the moments when invisible becomes invaluable, when hidden talents emerge in the most unexpected places, and when we discover that brilliance often hides behind the most ordinary appearances. Have you ever encountered someone whose true abilities were completely different from their job title? Share your story in the comments below, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. If stories like this remind you that genius can be found anywhere, subscribe to Motivation Unknown People for more incredible tales of hidden talents and unexpected wisdom. Until next time, remember, the most brilliant minds sometimes choose the humblest work, and the greatest teachers are often the ones who've learned that true impact comes not from status, but from service.